Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have an incredible panel for you today. This one is totally focused on the intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion with the unemployment crisis. So I will actually be guiding you on this conversation today, but I will let everyone introduce themselves, give a little bit of context for who they are, and we can start the conversation. Roy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Roy Baladi. I'm the executive director of the SmartRecruiters nonprofit. It's called SmartRecruiters Cares. That's getting spun up. That's what I have to share. And I'm in Los Angeles at the moment.
Awesome. Crystle.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Crystle Johnson. I am a DEI practitioner in the gaming industry and also the founder of Meaningful. And Meaningful is an organization that exists to ensure that Black and Brown women have the tools and resources they need to navigate, grow, and thrive in corporate spaces. Happy to be here.
And Richard.
Good morning, where I am. My name is Richard Bronson. I'm the founder and CEO of 70 Million Jobs. We are a national for-profit employment platform for people with criminal records. And I am also in the midst today of launching Commissary Club, which is the first social network for the formerly incarcerated. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Mimi. Mimi, do you want to introduce yourself? Can you hear me? Well, we'll start the conversation, but we do have Mimi here, who is the acting CEO of Code 2040, which is an incredible nonprofit organization that helps Black and Latinx technologists advance in the technology world. Awesome. So love to kind of kick things off. So DEI has been extremely visible over the past few months, but underrepresented minorities, in particular groups like Black and Latinx people or felons, have been disproportionately impacted by the unemployment crisis. How has this crisis impacted DEI initiatives from your perspective? Would love to kind of go around and hear how everybody's seeing this play out. Crystle, do you want to kind of kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this question is really layered. So I'm going to try my best to keep it brief. So I think during this time, we've really seen a scaling back and a scaling up of DEI efforts. And it's been compounded by the pandemic and the reckoning that we've all seen around racial and social injustice. So I'll try to focus my response really on the scaling up piece of these efforts. So I think in some cases, we're seeing organizations that are having the hard conversations, they're willing to do the hard work, especially with dismantling any systems that have systemically marginalized Black and Brown communities, as well as other marginalized identity groups. Organizations like these are making long-term commitments because we all know like this is a long-term play. It's chess, not checkers, to this work to make sure that they're realizing equity and justice. And then on the other hand, we've seen a lot of organizations that are taking performative actions at this time that aren't really addressing any systemic injustice or inequity. One of the organizations that I love that I am connected with on LinkedIn is the Winters Group. And they recently released a few questions that organizations should be asking themselves as they are taking action. And those three questions are: one, whose experience is centered? Two, who does this action benefit? And then three, is the action disrupting the status quo or is it preserving it? And it's important to note that if you're centering those who have traditionally been in power or those who have traditionally benefited, and if you're preserving the status quo, your actions are not in the pursuit of equity and justice. And I think it's just a really great way to check yourself and check the organization as you're considering how you take action during this time.
Awesome. Mimi, I see you nodding vigorously. Yeah, I would love to
Yeah,
hear
exactly.
your thoughts on it. Welcome.
Hi, folks. Sorry I was a little late. Thank you. I'm not going to repeat what Crystal said, but I could not agree more with those sentiments. I work at Code 2040, which is a racial equity nonprofit that focuses on technical talent, particularly in the Bay Area, but all over the country. And we're definitely seeing a mixed response also. There's a tension between folks who are committing personal resources and kind of putting their own skin in the game individually, as well as organizations committing resources and putting sometimes their reputation on the line, with austerity measures that we're seeing companies start to undertake, kind of in preparation and within this flagging economy. And so there are pluses and minuses. Like, when cuts are made in an organization or to budgets regarding DEI, the people with the least power are the first affected and the most disproportionately impacted.
Yeah.
So, and we're also seeing companies like recently Coinbase, right, announcing that they're not going to allow political opinions in their company, whatever that really means. But I think what it means to them doesn't matter. It's really a dog whistle to let conservatives or libertarians or white supremacist workers know that there's a place for them where their ideologies won't be challenged. So, but on the other hand, what I'm also seeing is that a lot of times companies that we partnership are really interested in working with us to access Black and Latinx talent, but they're not really interested in looking at the broader systems in place and the cultural problems and obstacles to retention and recruitment. And in these last 6 months, we've really seen companies that are willing to look at systemic problems and systemic solutions that are uncomfortable and don't always have a clear and immediate ROI. And that's really exciting because truly at Code 2040, we really believe that that's where that hard personal and cultural work is really what undergirds social change. So it's a mixed bag.
Cool. Yeah, and we love Code 2040. We actually had a donation drive to Code 2040 at the last RAC conference, so we love the work that you all are doing over there. Richard, what does it look like from your neck of the woods? How have you seen the crisis impact things?
My view and the work that we do is sort of skewed and sort of not. We work pretty much exclusively with men and women who have some kind of criminal history. And while numbers are improving, historically, that has meant a disproportionate number of people of color. So, I guess it's fair to say, and let me just interject in the interest of full disclosure, I have a record myself. Our people, therefore, have a couple of strong headwinds they have to address. And that is their color very often, and that is, for many of the mistakes they made when they were children, that essentially, has burdened them with a stigma, essentially a life sentence for things they did long, long ago. The unemployment rate among this population, even prior to the coronavirus onset, when the country was enjoying historically low unemployment of 3.5%, even then, it was about 25% unemployment among this population, which actually is a higher rate of unemployment than even during the depths of the Great Depression. And in fact, no discrete population has ever experienced unemployment that bad in our country's history. Of course, when the coronavirus hit and companies were laying off wholesale, workforces, every one of our people got laid off, because typically the jobs that we work with, our sweet spot, so to speak, are jobs that occur in warehouses and manufacturing facilities and even food processing, which was some of the worst outbreaks, of the coronavirus, months ago that we saw. In short, jobs that can't be worked from home. As hourly workers, they were the first ones to go. and certainly they have not been hired back at all. I have read figures that estimate their unemployment rate currently at around 53%, which is a story that just hasn't been told, but it's staggering, in its awfulness. My work has always been working with HR departments and sometimes with diversity officers at large companies. And I would say across the board, and we in fact are partners with SHRM in their initiative to get talent back to work. They're urging companies to consider hiring people with records. I believe that the HR community and the diversity community certainly are very much on board, and given their druthers, the problems wouldn't be nearly as bad as they are. But unfortunately, they're not calling the shots, particularly at big companies. And there's this sort of insidious, secret kind of cabal, that works to undermine any progress that we might, otherwise experience in this area. The legal departments and other executives, and more than anything else, antiquated hiring laws, matrices that companies employ, the parameters of what they will and will not accept, that don't have any relation to reality, or they're operating on myth and age-old biases that don't apply anymore. So it's pretty dire, I guess, is how I would end all of this, sad to say. And, what's truly sad and a bitter irony is that, in fact, these folks do incredibly well on the job and help workforces almost uniformly. But unfortunately, they're rarely given that opportunity. And as such, this terrible cycle of recidivism just keeps turning.
Roy, any thoughts on what you're seeing from your seat?
Look, it's dire, but there is hope. And here's the evidence I see. Back on February 14th, I had helped organize a conference called Hiring Success. And in there, we had invited hundreds of recruiters, like 200-300 recruiters, to meet 200 to 300 job seekers from underserved communities, be they blind, deaf, formerly incarcerated, refugees, coming from extreme poverty, whatever the case may be. Worked with the different NGOs in San Francisco to bring them there. They all met. Mentorships have started. Relationships have kept and maintained. Then the pandemic hit in March. I re-invited that same group to meet again online. You know how many recruiters showed up? 5. Out of and 40 different NGOs, diverse NGOs had showed up. Now, granted, in March and April, everything was everyone was trying to reassess what was going on. Everybody was trying to get used to online work. Everyone was trying to take all their processes that they had and kind of digitize them. So they were busy with that, plus layoffs where recruiters were disproportionately affected because not much recruiting was happening. However, the good news is that we've unleashed, a movement has been unleashed of, awareness on racism and inequality. And it's personal now. It's personal for so many people inside organizations. People make organizations. So there is hope. And the perspective that I have when I say that comes from that of a talent acquisition suite, SmartRecruiters, and that of an activist. So we launched a campaign called Jobs for Lebanon back in December, and that took off to call the global diaspora to hire Lebanese in Lebanon. Granted, and that took off to create more than almost 1,000 jobs and more than 100 people get employed for a very small country. That type of movement, grassroots-led movement, is replicable across different types of segments of the population, be they formerly incarcerated, be they Black or Latinx or whatever, be they blind or deaf or neurodivergent. And so from a talent acquisition standpoint, from a SmartRecruiter standpoint, that led the organization to ask me to double down on this and start a nonprofit arm of SmartRecruiters to replicate what was done for Jobs for Lebanon and create a free staffing agency for people from underserved communities, jobs for single moms, jobs for the blind, jobs for Black leaders for free so that they could get employed. And this kind of recommitment to change the game and go from the bottom up and actually support and take advantage in a sense of that way to channel that energy in towards job creation, where lots of recruiters are happy to come and support on a volunteer basis to place people. Lots of employers are saying, hey, I may not have the budget right now to have a D&I officer or to be able to staff and keep budgets there, or have fewer budget, but a lot of my recruiters are willing to help. And so that kind of bottom-up approach can work, and there is momentum behind it, but that's not to say that budgets have been absolutely slashed for D&I. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm hearing is that kind of connection between personal commitment and organizational commitment. And one of the things, and you can hear this throughout the day, is that diversity isn't self-contained, right? Like, issues of DEI impact everything from recruitment marketing, the evaluation process, like campus recruiting, entry-level hiring, reskilling, career pathways. How can organizations, how can that collection of people approach these problems together and holistically? Crystle, I know in some of our conversations, you have a pretty awesome approach to the way that you're thinking about restructuring the entire hiring process. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how an organization can try to recognize the scope of DEI in its hiring processes.
Yeah, so I think that the best approach for this work in general, not even just for recruiting, is a holistic one. And at many organizations, what we've seen historically is that DEI has been this extra add-on or this thing that's over there in the corner. But I think a lot of organizations have realized in recent years and recent times that inclusion has to be weaved and embedded through every process and system. And whether that's a people-facing system, the people in your organization employee-facing, or whether it's a customer-facing system. So it could be your internal people processes, and it could also be your product and services that are, again, going out to your customers. So in the case of recruiting, I think there's three things to keep in mind. So the first thing is that there has to be buy-in and ownership from the top, from your C-suite. So they can't just be there to say, yes, we agree, this is what we should be doing, but they actually have to take ownership. They have to set the tone. They have to set expectations for inclusive hiring. And most importantly, they have to be there to draw a line in the sand to dispel any myths that people are thinking about. And one of the ones that we often hear is that underrepresented talent or diversity isn't equal to quality. So it's really important that they're there to, again, draw that line in the sand, to be very clear about what their expectations are. And then another thing that we often hear is that we don't have time, like we have to fill this role really quickly. And I think that having leadership owning and buying in will really give people, recruiters, hiring managers, whomever, the space that they need to do the work that needs to be done to build that bench of underrepresented talent. And then secondly, it's important to collaboratively contract with all key stakeholders. So you mentioned recruitment branding and other orgs across the organization who are involved in hiring. It's important to make sure that everyone has the same foundation, same level of understanding. They understand the expectations. They understand what role it is that they play. So you can be a well-oiled machine. And then third, I think it's really important to be transparent because you can't do this work, again, as you mentioned, over in the corner by itself, just self-contained. The people in the organization have to understand what is the approach that we're taking. Why is inclusive recruiting important, and what part do I play? And in doing that, especially if we're thinking about individual contributors, they are the best ambassadors for your organization. So in that case, you have this holistic approach happening in the organization, whether that be through the C-suite, through leadership, or through individual contributors at your organization.
Awesome. Mimi, you have a pretty interesting vantage point here. Yeah, I mean, what does this look like from where you are? Unmute yourself here. Perfect. Mimi, we lost your audio. If you can hear us. We lost your audio. If you can hear us. Cool. Okay. Well, we can circle back here. There's certainly opportunity to we can circle back here. Dive back in there. Moving kind of forward, one of the things. So, moving kind of forward, one of the things. So, Crystle, you mentioned for those organizations that are committed to DEI, even for those organizations, one of the things that we found is we've been talking to talent leaders across the industry. One of the things that we found the definition we've been talking to talent leaders across the industry is that, Richard, I think you talked a lot about the intersectionality between, underrepresented communities and people with a criminal record. But how can TA push for policies and action that address the scope of the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, right? And this includes people that maybe aren't necessarily coming immediately to mind that are disproportionately impacted by not being able to work from home, or whether it's a single parent that is fully responsible for child care, or it's someone with a disability that impacts their ability to work as effectively on a computer over video versus in person. I love, Roy and Richard, you each think a lot about these things. Roy, I know SmartRecruiter Cares thinks a lot about that scope of diversity. How do you approach that?
Roy?
Roy, you're on mute as well.
Yeah, I put myself on mute to avoid some of the echoes. So there is a lot of unconscious bias that happens, and you don't know that you're being biased because obviously it's unconscious. Being a product, the SmartRecruiters, it is our duty to be able to educate ourselves on what are the biases that are being infiltrated in the companies that use us and try to mitigate them as much as possible. So to that end, starting at the top of the talent acquisition funnel, you've got job boards like 70 million jobs that we integrate with that allow us to, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Clear. That allow us to automatically post jobs to their boards. And you've got diversity.com, you've got the different HBCU Connect, you've got all types of diversity boards. So being able to integrate to them and bring that to the face of every recruiter who posts a job that has a bunch of diversity options, all they have to do is just press the button and send it, is extremely important. On top of it, you've got databases of talent like Intello, like Seek Out, that have that can increase your funnel of diversity. And here I'm talking purely from a technology standpoint, right? Then you've got, going down the funnel, matching candidates to jobs, being able to have a match score they'll give you a ranking that's completely indifferent to race and gender, and any other statuses is very important, because it allows someone, when they look at a screen and they're like, okay, I see their name, or I see their picture, or at some point in the interview process, you're going to see the person. So if you have some bias in you, you're going to have to explain, giving a lower review if the person is highly qualified for that job, because objectively, that's what they are. Then you've got obviously structured feedback and structured interview scorecards. that allow you to assess a particular skill rather than assess, I can kind of get along with this person. I'll go for a beer because we talked about baseball or because they look like me. And then going down the funnel, obviously you've got EO and OFCCP, the ability to, have that, report that diversity data back to the government, and then at least hold that line there. And then the last thing I would say is that we are right now in the process of hiring a chief diversity officer, not just for SmartRecruiters' own recruiting for us 300 employees. It's not a big organization, but to be able to put the right policies and support the candidates who come through and the organizations that use it. So I can only speak from a technology standpoint. How can you go down the funnel and reduce some of that bias?
Awesome. Yeah, Mimi, if you want to try kind of mute, I would love to hear how you're seeing this. I think we're still getting a little bit of feedback there. Goodness. Richard, from your standpoint, there's a lot. So, a couple of those threads that you brought up are really interesting, Roy, which is, you have, that kind of complete reshaping of the interview process and really focusing. This came up a little bit in a previous conversation where folks were talking about competencies and how you actually are assessing and really expanding the reach of evaluation at your organization. There's also a notion of expanding the top of the funnel and where you're looking for talent and what that experience looks like. Richard, that's certainly a place that you're thinking about, all the time. From your standpoint, how do you get organizations to really take a look at their top of funnel practices and what they're doing in that first step when they're trying to get in front of potential candidates?
It's a great question. Like Roy pointed out, there's ample resources available to the HR professional to identify and ultimately hire, diversity candidates.
Yeah.
And there's certainly enough unemployment to serve whatever demand exists. I don't believe that the problem lies, if there's a problem, I believe there's a big problem. I don't believe the problem lies with the HR professionals, with the recruiters, one bit. I believe that in this country, there is systemic racism and biases that exist unfairly towards, as other folks here have mentioned, a variety of different populations. What I believe is required has nothing to do with the company nor the HR professional. I believe, and if Black Lives Matter and the activism that we've seen globally surrounding it, if I've learned anything, and I hope I have, it is that a group of people passionately coming together and speaking with one voice can indeed have an impact. I don't believe that women would have achieved whatever strides they did achieve without the women's movement and a number of incredibly, brave and committed women who, stood at the front of the line to say, enough is enough. This just isn't right. And that was true of the civil rights movement. And there were people who approached it one way, like Dr. Martin Luther King, or the Black Panthers did it another way. But it wasn't given to them. It wasn't given to the LGBT community either. It required groups of well-intentioned people to stand up together because they speak louder with that one voice and demand change, And I don't think it's coming internally. because I talk to these folks every day, and the motivation there exists abundantly. These folks do care. They were brought to the HR profession, I believe, because they're people, you know, and they are humane and caring. The problem doesn't lie with them. It's a systemic problem that we have in our society, and it will only, you know, in my opinion, we will only see significant change if, you know, populations come together and, you know, exert whatever collective power they have in speaking out and demanding change and pushing to get their place at the table. And that may be a little messy at times, and there may be a little collateral damage at times, and there may be a fire on one street and a door that's painted on another. But history has shown us that's the only way this stuff happens. So I am very much an advocate for the population that I work with, the 70 million Americans, the 1 in 3 adults who have a record, to say, let us come together for the first time and let the courageous ones among us open their mouth and provide inspiration to those who, you know, have been living in the shadows. And just like their sisters from the women's movement and their brothers and sisters through civil rights, and, you know, I can go on and on and on. That's the only way it's going to happen. So I believe Ray said, excuse me, I keep calling you Ray, no, it's Roy. Roy said things are getting better. I happen to believe that the zeitgeist is changing. You know, I can tell you regarding the population and my issues regarding criminal justice. I got out of prison 25 years ago. Things have improved, but they're still a long way off. And there's certainly, it's not a good answer to the single, you know, mother who did time and now can't get a job and can't afford to feed her kids. Unacceptable, as far as I'm concerned. Unacceptable. This is not what we stand for as a country, and this is not what being a human being is. So that's the way I think it's going to change. Sorry to get a little preachy here, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly why we like to bring voices together and bring the community together to talk about these things. And that's, you know, we're constantly trying to find ways to make our voices heard at our companies and our daily lives as a community of HR professionals that care about, you know, issues that impact us every day, you know, whether it's putting food on the table or, you know, having a job that you can go to and the life that you can provide for your family. And, you know, one thing that's really powerful about talent acquisition, about HR and hiring is that, you know, you're responsible for such an integral part of people's daily lives. You know, one of the things that kind of Roy, that is a fellow person at a technology company I think about all the time is that, you know, there is this notion of bringing data into and kind of pouring data as the sort of sunlight that you're using to anesthetize the wound and really understand the scope of what you're looking at today, and, you know, take those sort of higher minded ideals and, you know, translate them into, you know, hard and fast goals. Crystle, I know this is something that you've done a lot of work on, and you've thought a lot about how to bring data into understanding DEI initiatives. Where, you know, for an organization that cares, like, where do you start? Like, how do you start looking at what your organization's doing and the data that's building that picture?
Great question. And I think Roy spoke to this a bit earlier when he was talking about the funnel. But the first thing that I'll say is that before you make a move, always check your data to understand the state of your organization, and particularly in this case, the pipeline to hire. So it's important to understand if the talent that you're seeking is even applying for your roles, and if they are applying, where are they falling out? Are they falling out at the recruiter stage? Are they falling out at the ATS stage? Are they falling out once they've talked to the hiring manager? Or is it around the offer stage? And is your organization dispositioning the candidate, or is the candidate opting out themselves? And this is going to really help you to understand where the hole is in the leaky bucket, and how to, and what to do, what solution to implement to plug that hole. And whether that's your outreach, whether it's your processes or the experience itself, maybe there needs to be some additional education, training that your hiring managers, sourcers, recruiters need to go through. Whatever that is, the data is really going to help you to inform how you move forward in a way that is going to fix any systemic inequity that's happening and go beyond performance or performative action.
Dave, now your audio is out.
Goodness gracious. Well, we're in the last minute here. Audio issues aside, so what I'd love to hear from each of you is just what's the biggest thing that needs to change when it comes to candidate experience, when it comes to DEI in this process in this moment. So yeah, I mean, Roy, we'll start with you. What's the biggest thing that you see that could change? And you're on mute, so reminders on mute.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I think will change versus needs to change. The needs to change is you must have more women and more of a racial representation at the C-suite, at the boardroom, at the executive level. Because once you have this, it can trickle down to the rest of the organization. It can trickle down through the rest of the culture. And until you have this, you're swimming against the current. What I think will change is a bottom-up movement is what I'm seeing happening, an actual movement of inclusion where people are saying, you know what, I will take a chance. Like, the world is fucked up as it is right now. I will take a chance and hire people who are different than me. I will make a move within the sphere of influence that I have at the recruiter level. I will hire someone and make accommodations for a single mom. The fact that most of us are remote is very helpful for people who are neurodivergent, for people who are single moms, for a group of people that has helped. So that's what I think is going to happen. You're going to see a lot of bottom-up movement, but I think what needs to happen is at the top down, you need more representation at the board level and the C-suite.
Awesome. Richard, what's the biggest thing that needs to change?
Ultimately, important change is difficult, obviously. And I think if we look at history where change has occurred, it always seems to have been either an individual or a group of individuals who had both the vision and the courage to take on this huge challenge. And it's interesting because before I talked about the women's movement and I talked about civil rights, to a great extent, the HR community had a great deal to do with whatever changes and whatever positive, progressive movement, that occurred in the lives of these folks, because people dared to do something scary and to take a chance. And as Roy mentioned, hire some of these people. And I think, there's a chapter in history that the HR community deserves that sort of recognition. Unfortunately, the nature of the human, being, we're frightened of people who aren't like us, and we're resistant to change and all kinds of other things that are antithetical to the sort of change we'd all love to see here. But I think that there are, and there will be. I work with some truly heroic HR people whose attitude is, I'm not going to leave this planet before I really use, the tools and the power that I have in the position that I have, you know, to make lives better for as many people as I can. And it is humbling to be in their presence, and they are inspiring, you know, to me and my team, to have the honor to get close to them. And I would just urge that the people who are watching this and listening, you know, where do you want to be? Where will history look upon you and the life and your professional career? And did you do what you could do to further what you know to be right? And if you did, you know, you'll sleep well tonight. And if you didn't, come back tomorrow and do better, because it's in your power to do it.
It's beautiful. Crystle, what's the biggest thing? Any final thoughts?
I want to say I certainly do want to sleep well at night, Richard. So I'm going to be doing all the things.
All right.
But what I would say is the thing that we have to do, we have to be willing to break the system. We can't be willing to just patch the holes that we see here and there, but we have to be willing to break the system, to rebuild it in service of equity and justice. And I think that a lot of people have said, oh, I challenge the status quo all the time, but are you challenging it in a way that is more than superficial? And in order to go beyond being superficial, you have to be willing to break it. You have to be willing to have the hard conversations, and again, to rebuild in service of equity and justice.
Awesome.
Right on.
Thank you so much. Richard and I connected before this panel, and we were kind of talking about it. And, you know, I told Richard I'm optimistic, partially because I have to be. I think I have to. Just as a person, I have to be optimistic and hope that things are going better. But one of the things that an advantage I have to being optimistic is I get to talk to leaders like you, Crystle, like you, Roy, like you, Richard, and hear the work that you're doing, the way you are approaching this problem holistically, systematically, and trying to move things forward. I'm so glad that we were able to bring this conversation on stage today. If you check the stage chat, there's just a ton of love and feedback there. So thank you so much to each of you. This was really special.